Even when you're operating at a world-class level, you can still blunder when people are pressurizing you all the time to move.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Today we're speaking with a global health and fitness industry analyst who is committed to improving the health and well-being of society. He is the founder of Gymtopia, the award-winning platform distinguished for curating corporate social responsibility projects and authoring reports that analyze the fitness industry's evolution. With a mission to help purpose-driven, high-impact social enterprises to be successful, he produces work that is both inspiring and influential. His recent report, the Health Club Industry's Active Aging Report, argues that the fitness industry needs to harness the opportunity of engaging an aging society. So for this week's episode, with the Managing Director of UK-based Oxygen Consulting and the founder of Gymtopia, please welcome Mr. Ray Algar to the Escape Your Limits podcast.
I don't often tell people about my time as a gym operator because it didn't end well for me. I was over optimistic. I tried to buy a health club business out of administration. Administration is the UK version of Chapter 11, and I think I overestimated or I underestimated the complexity of making that happen, and that was, if you like, one of those moves we were talking about earlier in chess that I really should not have made without more support from other people. And so that was a move that didn't go well for me. So anyway, I escaped from that but took some of those learnings into the work I do now, because the work I do now often involves helping people to investigate the buying of a business or to invest in a business. And so what I've done, Matthew, is I've kind of taken what was an adverse experience for me, and I now can apply it to these projects where I say, if this was me again, if this was, and that's the role I take. I say, if this was my money, how would I feel about investing in this project? And it kind of brings a real sense of responsibility to the work that I bring. Does that make sense? When I'm saying to somebody, yes, you should invest in this business, or yes, you should buy this business, I'm really thinking, from a place where it's painful when you get these decisions wrong, really painful.
Thank you for supporting the Escape Your Limits podcast. If you're thinking about creating a unique and engaging fitness space to take your fitness to the next level, then we have you covered. Escape Fitness design and manufacture some of the most innovative, attractive, and durable functional training and free weight equipment used by many of the best trainers and fitness brands across the globe. As a valued listener, we are offering you a 10% discount off many of the products on our website. You can check out the full range by going to escapefitness.com and use the code DUMBBELL. That's escapefitness.com using the code DUMBBELL. That's it for me. Please enjoy the rest of this interview. So Ray, thank you so much for joining us on this I think it's my first podcast of the new year. So welcome to the Escape Fitness podcast.
Thank you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. So I understand you've had a bit of an interesting period. I get your fantastic reports, and I think the last one that we read, and I spent a lot of time actually talking around to some of our customers and staff, was the boutique report that you did, which I think was pretty eye-opening, really. But how I suppose not predicting what was going to happen. How's your business changed from what you were doing previously and to where you are today?
For about 15 years now, I've been working as an analyst to the global health and fitness industry, and I think my main job has been to try and chart its progress, both by looking back, but also I spend quite a lot of my time trying to look forward to the near future, 1-2 years out. And so over that time, I've been doing some deep dives, and what I tend to do, Matthew, is I look for kind of big shifts, big signals in the way that consumers are interacting with physical activity, wherever that happens to be. And I think what I've noticed is that these kind of big cycles happen, I would say, once every sort of 10 years or so. So once every 10 years or so, a kind of a big shift will happen. And so if we were to go back to, say, the beginning of this century, we started to kind of see the emergence of low-cost gyms, initially in Europe, and then slowly these ideas, these phenomena start to spread globally. And then sort of 10, 15 years later, you see another shift. You see the kind of a shift into these specialized boutique studios. So that's generally what I do. And then when I kind of see these shifts coming along, I think, you know what, this would be quite an interesting thing for me to explore and to spend a few months doing a deep dive. And then what I tend to do is then disseminate those findings in these big reads that you've been looking at. So that's generally what I've been doing.
And what, just for the listener, what sort of is it that's given you the ability to create these reports? And they are great reports. I recommend, if anybody hasn't seen them, to check them out. But you go into some great detail, and I think you really come at it from a very interesting perspective. I've seen on some of your posts you've got a bit of a framework. So what led? How have you been able to do what you do, and is there some sort of methodology that you tend to use when you're looking at a new trend within an industry?
Yeah, I don't, well, it's nice, but thank you for the feedback first of all. But I think one of the things that I probably bring to my work is that I did actually start in the fitness industry, 2 decades or so ago. So I kind of come up through the ranks, worked with various health club chains, run my own health club business for a while back at the beginning of the century. And then I sort of transitioned into becoming more of a strategic analyst and a commentator on the industry. So I think one of the things I've probably been able to do is bring that experience as an operator. And then, because at a later point in my career, Matthew, what I did is I went back to university and I got my MBA, and then went back to another university and got a degree, a master's in marketing. And so I have this kind of intellectual curiosity and a fascination, a passion for an industry. And I think I've just coupled those things together. And what that kind of gives me is something I describe as a kind of a strategic empathy for this industry. I hope that makes sense. I have a deep-seated interest in this, so that kind of fuels my passion. And then I think I have a real skill for telling stories. So the work I do, it doesn't come over as kind of cold and full of numbers. I hope it comes over that it's full of kind of humanity. It's full of curiosity and passion. When low-cost gyms started to emerge, for example, there was some pushback against this model because it was kind of seen as stripping away some of the human side of the industry. So in telling that story, I had to say, well, no, there's still quite a large human side to the emergence of low-cost gyms. Yes, they use less staff. They're driven by more technology, but at essence, they still are serving this common purpose, and that's kind of to get the world moving. And that's a kind of a shared purpose that the entire industry has. Sometimes they just come at it from slightly different angles.
So when you look at these different trends, like the ones I've seen is there's mid-market, there's the low cost, there's the boutique. With all of these different trends that are emerging, what is there anything that's common in terms of what tends to drive them? You use the word human. Are these just things that as humans we kind of evolve and we want a slightly different option, or what are you seeing that if there is anything that's in common with all those things?
Probably, one of the things I try and do is I try and root back, a business to serving some, deep-seated human need or desire. So, when we think about, the purpose and what the health club industry and the wider physical activity industry is actually doing. What at its essence is it serving? What is it fueling? It's supporting people with the desire to move. To drive this deep-seated desire for humans to drive physicality, for them to have some sense of self-efficacy. That they can get better at something. That we can create places where people feel comfortable, where there's a sense of belonging. So those are the kinds of things that I think power any business, across any industry. That it has the capacity to tap into deep-seated human desires. And the thing about human desires is they don't change over time. Regardless of what's happening in the environment, regardless of how volatile the world seems, how crazy it seems at the moment. If good businesses, great businesses, I think, can stay, tethered to these deep-seated things that we as people will always need, to feel safe, to feel welcome, to feel that we're making progress in life, and it just so happens that the health club industry comes at that in slightly different ways. Sometimes we can do that at scale. Sometimes you can do that as a micro business. Whatever way you're kind of coming at it, that they all share this kind of common purpose. We want to get the world moving, and that's to be applauded. So different business models, but all I think tethered to the same deep-seated human desires.
So when you see the businesses or business models being sort of displaced from newer concepts, and I listened to an interview you did before about the sort of Zumba in a
Church.
£2 million beautiful fitness center, and then an old church hall. And are there things that you see where some of the businesses that are kind of maybe losing people are doing or not doing that the other ones are? Is there any common themes in that?
Well, if I could just talk about that church example, because it kind of it will go on to something I think we're going to talk about, which is the idea of gym substitution, and the idea of substitution, any business being substituted. That's a phenomenon that all businesses are facing at the moment. But that lovely story about the church that you mentioned, that's a kind of an example of how an instructor who was once very wedded to plying his trade inside gyms one day decided that building a business inside the gym was not the future that he saw for himself. And he started to sort of capitalize on the fact that exercise and physical activity can now take place in a myriad of settings. And I'm often fascinated. For example, if you were to go to Les Mills, a global portal, or the Zumba portal, and say, where can I do this? You'd be really surprised now at the venues, the settings where activity now takes place. For example, you can now do exercise in the American Embassy in Stockholm, for example. You can actually do classes inside. Who would have thought that? And the thing about these things, this idea that this whole phenomenon of where we exercise now, where we move, has absolutely exploded. That's an exciting thing, but it's also obviously a big challenge. So the church now, on many occasions, is good enough. It will displace the $3 million health club. And some CEOs will say, how can I possibly be displaced by a cold, damp church? That's really worrying, isn't it, when we built our business on these big, monstrous assets? But yes, you can, because if you are tapping into those deep-seated human desires, if somebody feels more comfortable, if they feel better served in that damp, cold church, and that's where they're going to go on a Thursday evening. And they're going to start bypassing what they might see as as large, sterile, exercise churches where they don't, feel that strong sense of belonging. And And I'm not sure there's much you can do about that. Maybe it's about, pulling back and saying, at the end of the day, we serve people. We need to get really good at understanding people, what makes them think, how they feel, and are we losing that, as some of these businesses, because remember, Matthew, some of the businesses now, the gym businesses are monstrous in scale, millions of Planet Fitness. What are they up to now? 10, 12 million members around the world, so these are monstrous businesses but at their essence, they've got to still come over as human at scale, otherwise the phenomenon I like to kind of use is you get salami sliced. If you can picture a salami slicer, it kind of slices away, doesn't it? If you imagine that $3 million health club that's doing a lot of things, but slowly over time, 50 members, 100 members are getting sliced away to something that 100 people, 100 members see as more authentic, or is more appropriate, or I feel more connected. So you have these large businesses that have the potential to be salami sliced, and that I think is a real worry.
And do you think that comes down to really, as you said, that human interaction, that sense of belonging and sense of, this is, I'm appreciated. I'm not just a number, and so I don't mind where I do it. I just want to do it with some people or a trainer or a community that I feel comfortable with, and that seems to be, in some cases, outweighing the 3 million investment in a beautiful building.
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, one of the things in which great business is measured now is we have to move, if you like, just beyond the idea of financial measurement, and as the global health club industry has grown, has industrialized, so it's brought in different sets of owners, with different lenses, that they have different measurements and metrics about what success is. Now, if you go back to the mum and pop operation who built their business on passion and empathy and on the desire to serve, their measurements are very, very different to when we're now working at scale. And I think, and that's not to say that one is better, that micro is always better than macro or large scale. It's just that we've got to think now that businesses have to be measured beyond simple financial metrics, that there are social metrics that we should also be using. There are environmental metrics, how often does the global health club industry think about, report on its environmental impacts? We hear nothing really about that, do we? So we are, as a industry, large consumers of scarce resources, but we would not really hear much attention being made to, whether we use those resources well, carefully, do we value them and do we report on them? We need to, I think, to start creating different conversations. And maybe, Matthew, this links back to the conversation that the industry's been having during COVID. That the industry has wanted to step forward and say, we're essential. Keep us open. Because we're doing good, we're creating social impacts, and how you feel governments around the world, there's a kind of a communication disconnect going on, isn't there? You kind of have the messaging kind of going in one ear and governments hearing something else, so why is there a distortion there? And I think leaders around the world need to kind of understand, well, how do we reconcile that distortion? What can we do about it? Do we need to take a big step back during COVID and sort of say, has there been too much of an emphasis just on, our financial measurement, our financial story? I think now more than ever, the companies in all industries that grow at scale are the ones that have a really compelling social story. The Tom shoes. Whenever I see a great company, the first thing I do is I look behind. I want to look behind it, and I want to look at the founders. Who are these founders? What's the founder story? But often, Matthew, when I go to say a large gym website, for example, there is no founder story. There isn't. And I kind of wonder why, does that mean that there is no story, or that they don't care about the backstory? Is it just about the product? Because I don't think consumers just want to buy your product anymore. I think they want to buy into your mission, so tell me what your mission is. Just before we came on air, I was looking at, Peloton is all over the news at the moment. And did you know Peloton was started on Kickstarter?
No, I didn't know.
Did you know that? Yeah, yeah. Did you know they did a very small Kickstarter 9 years ago, 2013, I believe. They went on Kickstarter, and the small team at that time, they said, we have a kind of an idea for a home exercise solution, and it's at a very early stage. And we believe in two things. We believe that home exercise can be better than it currently is, and we believe that technology might help us to deliver that. And they said, we'd like $250,000 to get this thing going. And I think when I looked, they raised $350,000. And that's the Peloton story. And look how that story look at the power of the momentum that business now has, just what, 8 years or so later. So I think backstories, compelling missions, tell me about that, because I think that's the thing that gets people excited about businesses. And often I think it's lacking from, when I kind of look around and I interact with many brands that are in this incredible industry to drive health and put people in happier places, because that's fun. In a way, there's similarities here with Disney, aren't there? Disney's mission is create happiness. And in a way, that's what health clubs and the wider physical activity economy is in the business of doing also.
Do you think that when we use the word industry, and I know that you've covered this before, but the information and the reports and the various organizations that report on this are really just kind of looking at it in a fairly narrow way, which probably comes back to your previous point in terms of governments and trying to make this essential, that we're, maybe people as from outside, I would class us as being inside it because we've lived with it for a long while, and maybe we're also a little bit tunnel vision. But when you, in terms of your what you call it, this fitness substitute, do you think there's probably a lot more going on that even the people in the industry realize, and as outsiders, it's like, well, what is the fitness industry? Where does it start and stop, and what encompasses it?
No, I think it's a really, really great question. And and sometimes I think kind of definitions get in the way, and I also think boundaries get in the way. Putting boundaries around this industry is like trying to herd jelly. You're never going to do it. I'll give you an example. When I walk my dog most days, I go down to my local park, and there's an old pavilion. It was just an old derelict building in the middle of the park, hasn't been used. About a year ago, some PTs actually took over that building, and they now have this phenomenal facility in the middle of the park. It has an outdoor gym, indoor gym. But the thing is, Matthew, it has no postcode. There's no zip code. Okay, so that's never going to appear in an industry report, and that's just one kind of tiny example of how this industry is kind of, it's exploding, it's kind of unfolding before our eyes, and it's going to be really difficult to put your arms around it and accurately document it. And I think sometimes when you read an industry report, it might give you a false sense of security, that every year we try and round it up, don't we? We try and put our arms around it and say, oh, it's this big, and last year it was this big. And I think sometimes it might be the wrong message. I think we now have an economy, that's what it is. It's a physical activity economy. And when you start thinking about this as an economy, then you start to understand, well, how many layers, how many parts does this economy have? Well, when you actually start unpacking it, it's vast and complex. It's this kind of living ecosystem, and it's really, and I think what's significant, I think, for people that are in this, is that they know where they sit, where they're positioned inside this vast kind of ecosystem, because it kind of goes back to one of our earlier points that, you know, you'll be misguided if you think you're just competing with the gym down the road, or this catchment of gyms down the road, because that's not the way to think about competition anymore. You know, put the consumer in the middle of this ecosystem and then think, you know, well, what choices, what opportunities to move does this consumer now have? And when you start mapping them out, online, offline, free, paid for, different price points, you know, supported, unsupported exercise. You know, do you need coaching? No, I don't. You know, it's vast and complex, and I think, but that I think might be a more helpful way to think. You know, if I'm trying to build this business here, do I know where I sit within this vast and ever moving and ever changing physical activity economy? You know, I don't need to be the biggest in this economy. I just need to kind of play a valued role in this economy, don't we? So we sometimes think biggest is best, but it's about impact. You know, can I create a social impact somewhere in this vast economy?
With what's going on in the world at the moment, a lot of businesses are thinking about where they need to go next. You've got the bricks and mortar that are thinking, well, do we go online? Because now, like the UK, for example, has just gone into another 4-6 week lockdown. So they're obviously businesses are saying, well, where do we go from here? In order to make some of those decisions, and we've spoken about it on the podcast before, about the danger of overextending and maybe going into digital, which is a totally different business model than a bricks and mortar. But do you think it's helpful to try and understand what you said about what is this sort of, what are the fitness substitutes, so that you can, because at the moment, a lot of the conversations and the webinars I see on it, you've got two choices. You're either bricks and mortar, or you're digital, and maybe there's some outdoors. But I've listened to you talk, and there's all these different kinds of clubs and groups and things that are a lot bigger than I even realized that are out there. So do you think that will help to try and really sort of map out, well, what are these substitutes? And maybe there's some other things that we could play in that are more aligned to our core business without us overextending.
Yeah, and sorry, let me just kind of explain what I mean by some of these substitutes. And you mentioned some of them are kind of, you know, fast growing. There's if we think about, you know, can I exercise now free of charge in a park? Well, yes, you can. We've now got Park Run. You know, so Park Run started, what was it, about 2004, you know, come together Saturday morning, 9 a.m., run for 5K. Starts in one park in London, free of charge, brings a small community of runners together. Moves to a second park, third park, and then suddenly explodes, moves offshore, you know, away from the UK, grows around Europe, then becomes a global phenomenon. So, you know, when I talk about, you know, fitness substitutes, you know, sometimes it might be a simple thing as an app, you know, that somebody is now moving to. You know, during lockdown, one of the platforms I've been using a lot, I box a lot. You know, when gyms were open, I really enjoyed sort of small group boxing, and, you know, and that was my community. That's where I felt at home. And after lockdown, I've now had to move online, but I've found a sort of a boxing community online and a platform online. So, you know, there are these kind of substitutes everywhere when we start looking for them. I think that the only kind of advice I could give, Matthew, really is, and I think you've been sort of propagating this idea as well. You know, I think during times of kind of, you know, volatility, you know, when signals in around the world are slightly chaotic, where it's hard to kind of get bearings. I think, you know, if I was in this kind of setting at the moment, what do you need? You need a compass. You know, you kind of need a compass and kind of say, well, you know, this is how we're going to set this business. You know, these are the things we believe in. You know, these are the things that maybe we need to sort of let go now. You know, COVID has taught us that some of these projects we're working on, we should abandon these. You know, if I was building a business, you see, looking at this from a kind of a strategic level, there are kind of two things you're trying to do. On the one hand, you're trying to get better at the things you're already doing. You know, you're creating and improving the things you were already doing before lockdown. And then the other thing I'd be doing, sort of when you're thinking about this at a strategic level, is you're also having to sort of say, well, we have to let go of things. So at the same time you're creating new services, thinking about new ideas. So on the left side you're creating, and on the right side you have to say, right, in order for this to happen, say let's say to release resources, we have to now cut free. We have to eliminate some of the things that we were doing historically that we thought were helping us, but are now perhaps hindering us. So, so the reset, the business reset might be we need to kind of, elevate what we were doing, but at the same time, let go of some of the things we were doing. That can be my only message, but the idea I think is, but take out this kind of this compass and say, these are the kind of the core values that were driving this business before lockdown. So let's not abandon those, let's stay true to those. And, we might need to refine what this business looks like, but it's still going to kind of be true to those three, and I would say three core values that we had prior to lockdown, and not get involved in this kind of how would you describe it? This kind of frenetic, race to innovate. This frenetic race to disrupt. I think it's sometimes not helpful. It's sometimes perhaps, Matthew, more helpful to do nothing, to pause, that while the world is kind of in this volatile state, just to kind of take time out, and rather than, if you like, respond to every signal that you see. And a signal, I mean, a signal from a magazine, or a signal from, say, a report, or a signal from a news broadcast, or a signal from a competitor. You'll soon get drowned in all these kind of conflicting signals. So best, I think, is to put those filters on. What's helping us, what's hindering us. Let's be disciplined. Let's be really disciplined about this. Let's let go of some things that we felt were really dear to this brand. Let's just let them go, because they're not going to serve us, in this kind of post-COVID economy that we're waking up to. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I like the idea of pause, because I think, and I suppose it's natural, particularly if you're an entrepreneur. It's like, okay, well, we need to do something, and I guess that, and I've seen it, and we've probably been guilty of it in some cases as well. But I think you can sort of feel pressure to say, well, look, we've got to do something. What are we going to do? And I've certainly seen, when we came into this situation, everybody thought it was going to be a few weeks and then a few months. Now it's in some places it's almost, it's coming on a year. And so I suppose at different timelines throughout that, some of those decisions, if you'd have waited, may have been better or worse. I guess you never really know. But I do think I do think the pause idea, and just seeing what happens is an interesting thought. That's for sure.
I don't know about you, but during lockdown, I've been playing a lot of chess. I also watched. I don't know if you realise, but the whole world is getting excited about chess at the moment because of the Queen's Gambit on Netflix. But in chess, you can make excellent moves, you can make inconsistent moves, and you can blunder. And so grandmasters, for example, grandmasters who've reached the very pinnacle of their profession can blunder. And even Magnus Carlsen, the world chess champion, in a moment of crisis, when he's time pressured, because chess can sometimes be played just over the course of 1 minute or 3 minutes. When these grandmasters are pressured, they can themselves make blunderous moves that mean they lose the game. So even, I don't know if that's helpful, but even when you're operating at a world-class level, you can still blunder when people are pressurizing you all the time to move.
So with the chess analogy, though, obviously there is a time limit that you have to do something. So how would you get that balance between, like in a chess game where you've got to do something, but you don't want to blunder?
What the grandmasters do is they, chess has millions of infinite combinations and moves that you can make, and even at a grandmaster level, you cannot compute. You don't have the time nor the intellectual capacity to compute all the different variations. So what they tend to do is they tend to kind of see candidate move, what they describe as a candidate move. So this looks like a good move. Candidate move number one. oh, over here, this looks like a good move, candidate move number 2. So they look for candidate moves, and so they simplify what they're looking at. And then they say, right, so I've now identified 3 candidate moves. So which of these 3 candidate moves would best optimize, the ambition here, which is to win the game? So that's what they do, is they have this capacity to synthesize, very rapidly, obviously, large amounts of data, and then they have this capacity to chunk it into these candidate opportunities. And I think that's what any business should do, isn't it? These are not always kind of it's either we do this or nothing. We often have candidate moves ourselves that we can make. I think sometimes we might just underplay those candidate moves and say, because and I've done this, to my detriment in my own business. I've bought health clubs, for example, in the past, which were not the right candidate moves, for me, because they ended spectacularly badly. So that's a case where you bring too much optimism and too much confirmation you bring too much of yourself to something. And in those situations, I think it's best to kind of take yourself out of it, to distance yourself, come up with these candidate moves, but then also then bring in other parties to say, look, these are my candidate moves. What do you see? I think candidate move number 3 is what my business should be doing now. How do you see it? And somebody might say, you know what, I don't like any of those candidate moves. I think you should go back and find another one. But I suppose what we've done, though, Matthew, during that time is there's been this little moment of reflection. So it hasn't just been about, tomorrow we need to build a digital business. Friday we need to kind of, get Instagram. You can't work, I don't think, and pull off moves like that successfully, unless I think you're working in some large enterprise that have the resources to think at this level, quickly. So that's how grandmasters, I think, would try and simplify complexity.
And I suppose, regardless of the size of an organization, whether you've got 20 people or 2,000 or whatever, once you have decided on that move, you and your small team have agreed it, but then somehow you've got to communicate that effectively to people that are probably in some cases not even now working from home. So I suppose it may be even more important to probably have that reflection time, so when you execute, you can kind of make sure you do a good job of the execution part as well, which is probably equally as important as coming up with the idea in the first place. Would you say?
Yeah. No, I agree.
So you talk about strategic clarity, and one of the things that I think, in certainly reading your reports, had a big impact in the success of the boutiques was this really sort of clarity about who they are, what they're doing, who they're going after. Do you see that in this sort of post-COVID world is going to be just as important or more important than probably what it was before? Because in the early part of the conversation, we did talk about the businesses that are doing quite a few things and that are having this sort of salami, losing little members every now and again, maybe because they don't have that clarity. What's your views on that now as we're in a different world?
Well, if I think back to to the work I did around boutique studios, one of the things I tried to do when I was looking at that is I tried to understand why consumers were gravitating, if you like, away from sometimes big boxes, where the operator was a generalist, if you like. They were doing quite a lot, providing quite a lot, and how consumers were slowly drifting to something smaller and more intimate and more specialized. So I was trying to think of, how do we kind of, if there was a recipe for this smaller intimate business, what would the ingredients of that recipe be? And I started to think about, well, they were operating at an intimate scale, but I think the most important thing about what they were doing is they had a really compelling mission. These founders really believed, deeply in something, in a discipline, in an activity, a single activity. That could be indoor cycling, or it could be yoga, it could be Pilates. It could be functional fitness, but whatever it was, whatever their chosen activity was, they believed in it, they committed to it. And I think once you do that, you commit to becoming a kind of an expert leader in that, and that in itself starts to create this kind of halo, I think, around the business. I think all of us now, everyone is time poor. None of us, I think, would ever say, "Oh, I've got too much free time in a day." And I think one of these things these businesses do is they say, "Look, if we are going to ask an hour of you, we're going to make sure that is a really useful, purposeful, effective, efficacious hour." And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that's changed, hasn't it? How, there's got to be a kind of a deeper realization that we're asking people for large chunks of their time. And there's got to be a kind of an equitable value exchange, Matthew, I think. If you're asking somebody to commit 3, 4, 5 hours a week, let's say, then make sure that there's a good return on those hours, a really, really good return. And I think, what we're seeing with some of these smaller, more specialized, these more purposeful businesses that are coming, I think they realize that, that that we do value your time, and we're going to make sure that over the next 60 minutes, there's no better way that you would want to spend that. But if we would apply that measure to how we knew health clubs, say 20 years ago, there wouldn't have been this kind of this understanding that we are asking something precious of somebody, this precious commodity of time. I can remember, I won't say the name of the CEO, but one of the UK, a very large UK chain, probably about 10 years ago, I was having a conversation with him, and he happened to say to me, he said, "Ray, the other day I was in one of our clubs and I was on a balcony and I was looking down onto the gym floor at the activity that was going on. And he said to me, to be honest, I was really disappointed with what I saw, because what I saw were people kind of, they were lounging on bikes, reading magazines, they were reading books, they were listening to music. In essence, what he saw is he didn't see a lot of purposeful activity going on." And I think, and yet, if you were building a kind of an exercise business, that would really worry you, wouldn't it? And I think it worried him. There was this wake up moment that really, is this what we've spent our lives building? This business where people are barely moving, and yet we're purported to be in the exercise industry. Can you kind of understand that? That would be a very worrying moment. And yet, how can you not, if you go to Barry's, for example, or so, how can you not move? How can it not be efficacious? How can you not come away, near death, if that's what you want, to have a near death experience, exercise experience? But, so I don't know if that's helpful, but and maybe this leads on to this wider story that the industry now needs, is about, this migration from fitness to health outcomes, how we need to start measuring. So what is it you want to get from us? Oh, you want to lower your blood pressure. Right, I understand that now. What is it you want to get from us? Oh, I'm trying to reduce my risk of heart disease. Oh, right, now I understand why you're here, why this matters. I think we need to get better we're very good at measuring what I would describe as outputs, but not very good at measuring outcomes. And I think in the future, I think companies in the physical activity economy are going to have to stop fixating about how many visits, how much are they paying, how long do they stay. And I think they need to get fixated about, am I creating social impacts here? We've heard a lot about mental well-being, haven't we, during lockdown? But how are we measuring that, Matthew? How are we measuring that? Where are the benchmarks? So when you join a health club, are we taking a benchmark for what's your mental health status, today, now? Are we? And then, right, over the next 6 months, if that's something you want to get better at, if you want to sort of get rid of some of these anxiety swings, and you might feel, well, let's help you with that, and let's make sure that we are measuring that, and we can report back to you on that in 3 months. Let's check in and see how well we're doing. So I hope that makes sense. Yes, we're very good at getting people getting people to a venue. Very poor, I think, at actually kind of translating all this, activity in a language that governments will care about, that commissioners will care about, and saying, now I understand. You guys really are doing vital work here, and you do a remarkable job of evidencing it and reporting on it, and we like that. We believe in this now, and we can use you now. So don't you think, that's why I think maybe there's been a slight disconnect during COVID. We need to get better at this new language of health outcomes.
There's a couple of things you said which I think are really interesting. One is measuring mental health. We had a lady on a couple of weeks ago, Kelly McGonigal, who talked about some new research where they've figured out these hope chemicals that are released by using muscle that measures. There's the science behind it that improves how you feel, so it makes you happier. It's relatively new research, and so that in itself. I'm sure there are some, but I've never seen a club that you've gone into to say, well, are you happier now after your first 30 or 45 days? That's a big thing, particularly with what people are going on in the moment. I think that's very.
Did you? Oh, sorry. Could I just jump in? Do you mind? There was a lovely project that was started a few years ago, and it was called Mappiness, and it was an app that allowed you to check in on your mental health, and the work came out of a UK university. I can't remember which one. We could look it up. And the idea of the app was, from time to time, it would check in with you. It would say, "Hi, Matthew. How are you feeling right now?" And then, but Matthew, the thing is, they were doing this at scale with hundreds of thousands of people. And so what you had is, at any moment in time, you had a real sense check about how this country was feeling. How powerful is that? How does Brazil feel at the moment? Well, let's just check in on the Mappiness app. There's some really powerful things we could be doing, couldn't we? Wouldn't that be a powerful thing? Every time you visit, let's just check in. Use the app. How are you feeling? 0 to 10. Tell us now. And then every month we can report, the mental health of our business, how it's changed, and not just with members, but with staff, with all stakeholders as well. I think there's just so many things that could be done, to elevate, the importance of the work that's going on inside these businesses.
I think that's brilliant stuff there, and again, it's slightly thinking out the box, but they're things that really, as an industry, we could be looking at. And at the moment, what's more important than people's sort of happiness is the most important thing, really, and the health and happiness certainly go together. But if you're feeling good about yourself, then a lot of the other things are going to figure themselves out. So I like that one. But the other one you mentioned, which I think is worth just commenting on, in case anybody missed it, is the time thing. I've never heard anyone say that before. And again, I'm sure people are talking about it, but I've never heard anyone sort of explain that going to a fitness club is you're trading time. You're giving away time from your family, or your work or anything else. And so in order to trade that hour or 2 hour, if you think about traveling to the gym and back, then you kind of want to, that experience, whether it's a restaurant or a friend or whatever, you kind of want that hour to count, don't you? And I suppose when you ask yourself, well, is that experience that I'm giving, and I want you to come in 3 or 4 times a week, am I really giving you a good trade, not just how much it costs, because you can get fitness for next to nothing now, like your park run, but is that worth the value of my time? And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. I'm
reminded of the previous CEO of SoulCycle, you know, when asked how and why do you price classes at $32? You know, why would a class cost $32? And her response was, well, that's the price of two cocktails. You know, so you know, just think about that, Matthew. You know, her reference point is not well, what's the price of the competitive facility down the road? Let's benchmark against that. There's a better empathy with the life of the consumer. In that moment, what they're saying is, you as the consumer, you have choices here, and we recognize that. You, I'm sure, would rather be drinking two cocktails at the moment. But if that's what we're competing against, let's make this next hour really compelling. And if we can, and we think we can benchmark against two cocktails, then we're going to charge you an equivalent price, a comparative price. And so, yeah, this is not a $10 experience. This is a $32 experience, or even a $50 experience. And suddenly, maybe, you know, you're kind of, you're free of these kind of constraints around pricing and marketplace, and the boundaries of our industry suddenly get bigger, don't they? Because you're thinking you're thinking like somebody that's more that has more empathy with the life of a consumer. You're thinking less of, you're from a product perspective, and you're thinking, you know, I suppose you'd call it it's a more kind of ethnographic approach, a more kind of human, person-centered approach. You kind of understand that in life we're all making choices and trade-offs, and these are valuable trade-offs we're making, and so we need to be benchmarking ourselves again. You know, at the moment we've got a big rival, haven't we? And that's, you know, online streaming services like Netflix. You know, the whole world. You look at the amount of time that people are prepared to exchange with Netflix. You know, it's phenomenal pull that business. You know, they operate pretty much in every country in the entire world now, bar about 3. You know, so they have global penetration on a scale that's never been seen before. And I suppose if I was a gym operator, maybe there's a lot we could learn from Netflix. You know, if I'm asking for 3 hours of this traded time, and Netflix is currently getting 15 hours of traded time, what can I learn, you know, from that business? Because that's pretty phenomenal. So let me try and understand that. Sometimes, you know, I think that's also what I like to do in my work is I like to learn from other industries and other businesses, and I like to bring those into this what seems like a story about physical activity, but actually it's much deeper, and there are many things we can learn from great businesses like Apple or Tom's Shoes or charities. Charity Water is a kind of a poster charity that I look at in the state. If you want to learn about how to enable technology, then look no further than this little water charity in New York that does a phenomenal job, you know, about how to mobilize a global audience around a cause, around, you know, bringing clean water to the world. You know, every business can learn from all these different interconnecting stories. You know, it's not just about picking up trade magazines and just seeing, well, what's going on in our world. You know, that's giving you a really narrow view of this really volatile world at the moment. You know, so open up your reading, you know, your sphere of reading as well, and your sphere of exposure, I suppose. You know, that's also going to be really helpful.
I think it's a sort of theme that goes through quite a bit of the things that you talk about, and when you talk about these fitness substitutes, you know, in some ways you've got it. The cocktail, the Netflix is a fitness substitute. The cocktail bar is, and I've never really thought about it like that. But sometimes I suppose when you're looking for answers, and I think a lot of people probably are at the moment, is it's probably useful not to really look at what's happening in our space, because the time thing is a real big thing I'm considering, because you're asking people to trade their time, and then the value. It's like, yeah, I've Christmas I went out and had a few cocktails, and yeah, they're about $20 or something like that a piece, and so yeah, that's I was there, my wife was in the gym one day, and that's what we were trading that time, and so I think in terms of your value and the options, it can be quite restrictive if you just if you just look in one place. So I think there's some important things there. So going on then, like I don't know whether you've done this, but you've mapped some interesting trends, as I said, the low cost, the boutique, etc. Do you see then that the COVID has created any new trends yet, or is it too early to see what they may be? Like, I know that one of your LinkedIn posts recently talked about the Precor Peloton situation. So do you see that as being one of these new things that you would probably research into a bit more?
Well, obviously there's big enthusiasm at the moment for how to innovate, how to bring connected fitness experiences into the home, and there's a lot of money pouring into that. I think why I was very excited when I heard the news about Peloton and Precor. I think I was more excited for the Precor team. How you had a 40-year-old business, Matthew, in Precor, coming together with an 8-year-old, and in a way that's quite remarkable, isn't it? How you had the kind of the 8-year-old technology-driven poster child, what is it, $45 billion market cap at the moment. But it was just really nice to see how these two quite different businesses were coming together to create something of more value. That was a really remarkable thing to see. I think one of the things I have been studying, which I think COVID has really accelerated, is this kind of relationship we have with the outdoors, and I think that's one of the things that I've been most excited about. Is a few years ago I started to look at the phenomenon around this term called biophilia, and biophilia. Could be defined as our innate connection with nature, and I started to get very interested in how we bring nature back into our lives. And I think what COVID has done, Matthew, is it's kind of shown how important nature is to us as a kind of a species. And so now I think there's an amazing opportunity to reinvent outdoor exercise, to make the outdoors, if you like, one big playing ground, and bring these kind of biophilic concepts, into the way we think about how we construct exercise programs. I was doing some work. I was working as an advisor to a large gym chain in Finland called Liiku. Liiku have about 35 clubs across Finland, and one of the things we were doing with that brand is we were working on their identity, on their brand story. This is a homegrown Finnish company, and they were facing a lot of competition from incoming foreign brands. And one of the things I thought that was being kind of under harnessed was the Finns' innate connection that they have with nature, and how the brand, if you like, which was personified through their gyms, was just like any other gym. And I thought we were missing something, how the Finns have this deep-seated connection with nature. That's where Finns want to be. They don't want to be inside sterile buildings. If you gave them a shot, they want to be outdoors, connected with nature, exercising outdoors. And I just think what COVID and lockdown has showed us is that nature is really important to humans, and we need to kind of not only respect it, but we need to integrate it back into our lives. We spend, what is it, 90% of our waking days inside buildings. We don't need more time inside buildings. We actually need more time outside. And if there's a way that the industry can now reintegrate itself outdoors while still having an indoor experience, then I think that would be a really interesting step change, going forward, how we embrace this whole concept of biophilia.
And what does biophilia mean, just out of interest?
It means that humans have this kind of innate desire to be connected with nature, that we're better as a species when we're integrating with things that are organic, and that we are diminished when we spend too much of our time inside sort of artificially constructed environments. So that's where we came from. We came from and lived in forests, but over time, our time in nature has been engineered out of our lives. And now we have this kind of artificial kind of indoor construct, and gyms have very much latched on to this kind of artificial indoor construct. That the setting, the place must take place indoors. And I think what COVID has shown us is we've got to kind of reset that we're vulnerable also, Matthew, aren't we? When everything is predicated by taking somebody to an indoor building, and suddenly that building is shut, that leaves you in a really vulnerable place. And so there's a kind of an economic story here as well, isn't there? Not only is being in nature good for us, but it's also good, good long term for our businesses. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think there's some really interesting work that could be done around how we embed exercise, into these outdoor spaces, how we start to reinvent sort of towns and cities, so that they become more movement enabled. That's going to be a kind of a big shift, isn't it, in the way that towns, cities are designed in the future, designed for mobility, not just designed for micro mobility, powered mobility, but designed for human powered mobility as well. So can you see how we went, but our conversation started with this kind of physical activity economy, and so you can start to see how it can evolve and extend its impact. I think and become much more than just these boxes, these places that we happen to strategically place, around the world, and then invite people to come to them a few times a week. How these spaces perhaps need to become more adaptable, and the whole idea of the business needs to move to a more kind of distributed way of thinking, doesn't it? I've often thought the magic shouldn't really be in the equipment. I know that you're in the equipment business, but the magic shouldn't be in the equipment, in the tools, should it?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
The recipe should be. It's a kind of a human-powered recipe as well. And there's a lot of knowledge that the industry has acquired. A lot of kind of it's accumulated a vast amount of expertise in how you encourage people to move. And I think now you're seeing how it needs to get better at distributing that knowledge away from these fixed venues, and then that puts it in a much more powerful place, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's the emphasis probably has been on, well, we build a building, we fill it full of machines that kind of show you what to do, and that's it. And I suppose yeah, that appeals to a certain demographic, but and again, whether the industry stats are correct or not, but there still seems to be a very small percentage of people that go to that type of place to get their fitness experience. We talked off camera about these behaviors, because it's certainly clear that there's not enough people working out or exercising, and there seems to be these roadblocks to that. Do you think partly some of that could be in terms of how we define what fitness should be, and should we now, a bit like what you're saying, look at all these different places so that we can sort of grow the pie instead of trying to compete for the same old people and drop prices in order to survive?
Yeah. I think one of the things, and we mentioned this, didn't we, previously, one of the things I've been trying to get better at in my work is understanding, what drives somebody to make the decisions that they do. So if you're in the kind of the physical activity industry, and you're trying to encourage somebody to embed more activity into their lives, what's the recipe for making that happen? And I think up until now, I think the kind of the wisdom has been, the assumption has been, well, what you do is you create opportunities for people to exercise. And by that, I mean, you build clubs ever nearer, closer to people. and that's how you get people to move. And if I could use a very personal example, when my mother was alive, she was struggling in the last 10 years of her life. She had diabetes, and she had sight loss as well. And as a result, she was becoming ever more kind of enclosed, trapped in her home. She wasn't walking enough, wasn't exercising enough. And I would relentlessly be putting exercise equipment in front of her, in her front room. So in other words, the opportunity for my mother to exercise was right in front of her, right in front of her. So the opportunity was there, but she didn't ever feel motivated or capable to climb on the bike. And I often, feel frustrated that there was this really big disconnect, So liken that to the way that the health club industry has kind of evolved. More clubs, more opportunity, ever more closer to consumers, and yet we don't see this kind of, we don't see the floodgates opening up, do you? You don't see this kind of step change which is what you'd expect. If it was an opportunity issue, then okay, let's solve the opportunity. Let's build more venues, more places. That should unlock unlock the golden ticket, but you don't see that in participation. So what's going on here? It's beyond opportunity. So what else do you need in order to drive a behavior? You need somebody to be motivated enough. You need to kind of get them, if you would think of a kind of a curve, they're below the curve. We need to kind of get their motivation up so they leap above the curve, so they're motivated to act. What else do we need? We need to give them a big prompt. There needs to be some big prompt, for them to kind of to act. So what I think I'm saying is that this is a more complicated recipe that I think the industry now needs to be serving up, and it needs to go beyond thinking, oh, this is an opportunity issue, this is a kind of a venue. We need to keep building gyms ever more closer, because Matthew, that isn't going to solve this issue. This is a more deep-rooted challenge that we have.
Well, there's certainly quite a bit to think about, and there's quite a few ideas I've been scribbling down that I've been not heard of before. So if people want to get a little bit more insights into what you're doing, or maybe get you involved in their business or reports, where can people find out more about you, Ray?
Well, my business is called Oxygen Consulting, and you can just Google me. And also, I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, Matthew. So people can find me, and I love doing this work. I love kind of hopping on planes when we're allowed to, and giving talks, especially with emerging markets, where there's a kind of a big learning curve going on. A few years ago, I was giving talks in Kazakhstan, and these places where they have emergent fitness industries, and I feel quite at home in those places, because it's really good when you can help people kind of navigate some of the mistakes that the more mature markets have made. So I hope that's been interesting. I also I did have COVID. I don't know if you were aware that I was diagnosed with COVID-19 last month, so I went through that journey.
And what just I was aware, and I didn't know whether to bring it up or not, or whether how you feel about it. But what was the experience like then, Ray?
Well, symptoms were very mild. So I had symptoms for about 2 or 3 days. It was really strange, actually. I remember doing a boxing session at home in the morning, Sunday morning, and completed it. Felt pretty good, and then just a few hours later started to feel quite strange, and then I had a test about 2 days later, and tested positive, but and symptoms were quite mild, and which I think as a kind of as a healthy 50-something that I am, with no pre-existing or underlying conditions, I was always hopeful that if I did get COVID, I'd sail through it, I'd come through it. But you know what, Matthew, all the way through this pandemic, I've always had this utmost respect for this horrible disease, because you never know what type of COVID you're going to get. You never know, regardless of how active, how well you sleep and what you eat. You never know whether you're going to get mild COVID, severe COVID, short COVID, long COVID. And so the word I've been using a lot during the last year or so is a real respect for this, this pandemic, and but also the fact that a lifetime of moving, of being active pays off, doesn't it? That maybe because of all the choices I made over the years about staying healthy and active and caring about those things, that kind of that's one of those moments where you kind of you draw down on your fitness bank and say thanks very much. That got me through it, and and then I was invited to donate blood plasma because I'm not sure if you're aware, but in the UK, people with very severe COVID, who are in hospitals in intensive care, can use the antibodies that are sometimes generated when you have COVID. So what you do is you go forward, they draw blood plasma, and then they test your body for the level of antibodies. In my case, unfortunately, it was too low. But if the antibodies that are a higher level, then that can be infused and used in people that are seriously ill in hospital.
Right. Yeah. So that's. I just hope. I hope I don't get it, but I guess, like you say, the best thing you can do is respect it. For what it is, and to stay as healthy as you can. I've spoke to a number of people that have had it, and some. I spoke to a relatively young, extremely fit guy we interviewed in Texas, and he got it really bad. He was, if you looked at him, he was a beast, it hit him bad. Where his girlfriend, she sailed through it. So it's it's a very strange one. It certainly affects people very differently. So so just generally, like what do you think are going to be some of the changes, or what will this space look like 12 months from now? I guess it's a very tough question, and I know I'm putting you on the spot. And you certainly raised a few things like outdoor. I think is pretty interesting. One that I'm sure is going to grow. But is there anything that you think that is likely to be different this time next year than where we are today? Hopefully the gyms will be open. That's certain.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing we haven't really touched on very much is, if you like, the role of the independent, the role of the single site operator in this conversation. I think at a global level, there's a lot of financial stress in that segment, and unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of those businesses not come through the pandemic. They're not capitalized to come through the pandemic. But I think there's a lot that can be rescued. Some will need government support. I think maybe, Matthew, what needs to happen is some of these independents might need to kind of form collaborations, or they might need to come under the umbrella of franchises. Perhaps this year, franchises have been seeing phenomenal growth, haven't they, over the last few years. Maybe this year, some of those franchise brands will also be stepping up and saying, what, we can put you under our wings whilst we navigate through this, really turbulent time. But there is going to be a kind of a real challenge in this, because in most economies it's powered by small and medium-sized and micro business. So that's the same in all industries. So a lot of attention, a lot of thought, a lot of support needs to go into that segment if we want to bring as many of those businesses through as we possibly can. Large businesses in the main will come through. They will recapitalize. We've seen that already. I think it's at the micro scale, and also I think some of the government intervention, the government support has been missing at the kind of this kind of micro level. The freelance trainers, the millions of freelance trainers, the millions of independents, who might not be working from physical property. I think there's both an opportunity and a challenge in that segment.
Yeah, go on.
No, go on.
Thanks for that, Ray. So, final question to you. Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. What would be a memorable example of escaping your own personal limits, Ray?
Well, I escaped from the hell of being a failed health club operator. I don't often tell people about my time as a gym operator, because it didn't end well for me. I was over optimistic. I tried to buy a health club business out of administration. Administration is the UK version of Chapter 11. And I think I overestimated or I underestimated the complexity of making that happen, and that was, if you like, one of those moves we were talking about earlier in chess that I really should not have made without more support from other people, and so that was a move that didn't go well for me. So anyway, I escaped from that. And but took some of those learnings into the work I do now, because the work I do now often involves helping people to investigate the buying of a business or to invest in a business. And so what I've done, Matthew, is I've kind of taken what was an adverse experience for me, and I now can apply it to these projects where I say, if this was me again, if this was, and that's the role I take. I say, if this was my money, how would I feel about investing in this project? And it kind of brings a real sense of responsibility to the work that I bring. Does that make sense? When I'm saying to somebody, yes, you should invest in this business, or yes, you should buy this business, I'm really thinking, from a place where it's painful when you get these decisions wrong. Really painful.
Yeah, I think people look at failure and generally class people who have been through it as being failures. But I think when you've failed and you've had to go through the emotional pressure and stress and the sort of hangover of questioning yourself and your decisions, I think it's an experience that you never forget, and it's one that you make sure that you never do again. So I agree. There's probably a huge amount of value, which is clearly what's motivated you to be successful at what you're doing now. So thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your time with us today. And best wishes for the year ahead, Ray.
Thank you, Matthew. I've enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.